What if you had a guide who could tell you how to bridge a gap between who you are today and who you're destined to be? What if each week you could hear a story of someone who has tried and succeeded, or perhaps tried and failed, but learned something in the process? Limitless Spirit is a weekly podcast where host Helen Todd interviews guests about topics and personal stories on defining life's purpose, pursuing personal growth, and developing a deeper faith in Christ.
There is this internal spiritual aspect of, nothing is actually going to make me feel better but Christ. Christ is my root of comfort. But even Christ acknowledged while he was, wearing flesh on earth, that there were some physical things, some outward things that really do affect your inward life. So I began to see some of those parallels, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I could incorporate some of these hyggelee practices into my home to create a place that reflected the one who was making a home in me. And from there, it became such a practical tool for me to be able to open my doors to my friends, my neighbors, my community.
Welcome to the Limitless Spirit podcast. I'm so excited you joined us for today's episode, where we're going to dive into a topic that's all about finding comfort, joy, and a sense of coziness in our lives. It is called hygge, and it is a Danish lifestyle concept that has taken the world by storm in the recent years. But here's the twist. We're going to explore it from a perspective of faith. I'm your host, Helen Todd, and together we will uncover how practicing hygge can not only bring us a sense of well-being and comfort, but also nourish our spiritual journey. My guest today is Jamie Erickson, who has written a book, Holy Hygge, where she unites the popular Danish practice of creating cozy spaces with the deep theological truths of the gospel. She unpacks for us the 7 tenets of hygge: hospitality, relationships, well-being, atmosphere, comfort, contentment, and rest. In the interview, we also talk about how combining the external veneer of a lifestyle with the gospel truths creates a life-giving space for you and others who enter it. Hello, Jamie. Welcome to the Limitless Spirit podcast. How are you today?
Well, I am thrilled to be here, Helen. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So let's first establish the correct pronunciation of the subject that we're going to talk about. Is it pronounced hygge?
Very close. Hygge.
Hygge.
And actually, if you ask the average American, they put a y into it. So it's hygge. But I think the Danes would correct you and say it's hygge.
Hygge. Okay. So I will briefly tell you how I even found out about this concept, but then I'm very interested to know how you got into this, because it has only become known in America fairly recently. And so I ended up picking up a white elephant gift for a Christmas party, and it was a board game, and it said hygge something. I didn't know how to pronounce it. It looked to me like Huggies, the diapers.
Yes, or Hygge. There's lots of different iterations of pronunciation.
So I brought it to the party, and it became a huge hit. And apparently other guests at the party knew about this concept. So I later Googled it and found out more things about it. But how did you become involved in hygge?
Well, my husband is mostly Danish, and that is where the hyggelee lifestyle centers from. I am not Danish. I'm actually Scottish, and I was not at all familiar with it. But We met in college. I was from Phoenix. He's from Minnesota, which is the Scandinavian Mecca of the United States.
Right.
It's the state that boasts the largest amount of Scandinavian population, including the Danish people. And so because he is mostly Danish and some Norwegian, he has been cocooned in the concepts, the lifestyle practices of hygge his whole life. Now, you are correct to your point that the idea, or should I say the word hygge, only made its way over to the States about 6 or 7 years ago. But the concepts or the practices are very ingrained in the Danish people. And so when I moved up here after we were married, I began to notice some very distinct differences in the culture of the Scandinavian people that were, in stark contrast to what I had been used to. They seemed so peaceful, so stable and steady. They can often be known as being stoic, but I think that that's just their outward veneer. They're very steady, and I actually find that to be very calming. And I like to describe their love as abiding. It's not flashy. It's not over the top. It's not loud and boisterous. It's just very abiding. It's constant.
Well, this description already sounds very appealing, but just for the sake of our listeners who have not heard this word yet, and I found out, I was talking with our team here at the office about this interview and discovered that none of them even heard this word before. So what is hygge, if you were to summarize it to a person who has never been exposed to this?
Well, it's actually really difficult to define in English terms because we don't have an English equivalent word for it. But if I were to give you the Cliff's Notes, it is a lifestyle concept that engenders feelings of coziness and contentment, comfort, rest. There's actually 7 different tenets of hygge that I feature in my book, Holy Hygge. But I don't want to limit it to just those 7. Those are just kind of the primary ones that we often think of when we think of hygge. So, you said you picked up a game that was kind of packaged up for our American fun. And I think that that's kind of what we've done here as Westerners. We've taken this lifestyle concept that has been ingrained in the Danish people for hundreds of years, and we've sort of shrink wrapped it and packaged it. And we want to define it by its aesthetics. We often think of hygge when we think of like a cozy cup of coffee next to a fire, a warm woolen blanket, sitting with friends around the dinner table eating. It's often defined by its aesthetics, but it really goes so much deeper than that.
Well, and I think the reason it has spread in the States and became so popular to the great extent can be attributed to social media, Instagram and Facebook. There are 8 million hashtags for hygge on Instagram alone. And you're right, it's always connected with the visual aspect of it. A hot chocolate on a winter day or fresh flowers by the bedside. But how does this translate into a lifestyle besides just the house decorating tips?
Sure. I think we often see it and associate it with those Instagrammable images because at the very core of hygge is this idea that the outward life will always affect the inward life. And just to give you an example of how you and I might relate that in our everyday, when we're sick, we love it when somebody brings us a hot cup of soup and maybe a warm blanket. That makes us feel internally good, even if maybe it doesn't actually make us feel physically healthier. It just swathes us and cocoons us in this comforting feeling. And so we do feel better. And I'm a Christian, and so I feel like there is this internal spiritual aspect of, nothing is actually going to make me feel better but Christ. Christ is my root of comfort. But even Christ acknowledged while he was, wearing flesh on earth, that there were some physical things, some outward things that really do affect your inward life. And that's why, you see him multiplying fish and loaves for the people because they were hungry. And he knew that they wouldn't really be able to listen to these deep truths he was sharing with them when all they could really hear was their bellies grumbling. So that's kind of where I see some of the parallel between Hygge and my faith is that, Christ acknowledged the outward life often does have some effect on the inward life.
I agree with you. So how did you embrace the elements of Hygge as you started your life in that society? How did you incorporate that in your life?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, it was just me acknowledging there was something different about my husband's Danish relations. There was this peaceful comfort. Even I would go so far as to say those who did not have a faith and trust in Christ, there was just this outward aesthetic of peace and comfort. But for those who not only were Danish, but also had put their faith in Christ, who is our ultimate comfort, who is our ultimate sanctuary. And that really is kind of what the Danes are looking for when they reach for Hygge, is this like sanctuary life for themselves. And we're all kind of chasing that same sanctuary that has been missing since the garden. That's kind of ingrained in humanity, to want to find a place to feel safe, to find a place to feel known and to feel loved. And as a transplant, somebody who came from a metropolitan, very large, I think there's like 4 million people in Phoenix or something like that, a very large area where I kind of felt unknown. I felt like just a number in the crowd, to a place where, they make it a point to make you feel seen and known and loved. That was very striking to me. That compelled me to dig a little deeper into the hyggelee lifestyle. And then I began to wonder, I saw a lot of parallels between Hygge and my faith. And I kind of saw how this was the Danes' way of doing what God had already done. God had already made this sanctuary life in the garden. And because of sin and death, that we were separated from him in our sin. And ever since then, we've been, seeking that sanctuary connection. So I began to see some of those parallels, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I could incorporate some of these hyggelee practices into my home to create a place that reflected the one who was making a home in me. And from there, it became such a practical tool for me to be able to open my doors to my friends, my neighbors, my community, to invite them in, not just to my home, but to my life, in order that I could then introduce them to the one who has changed my life for all of eternity.
Well, and there is definitely a spiritual parallel. I think that's what makes your book so exciting and unique, and really prompted me to schedule this interview because as I was researching the concept of Hygge, it was really attributing the beginning of it to the fact that the Danes and Norwegians, they have very harsh and long winters, and it's a very hostile environment to a human being. And so the Hygge was their way of surviving it and flourishing even during those long and harsh winters. And so the spiritual parallel is glaring, of course, for people who know the scriptures and who have Christ in their hearts. The world is a long, harsh winter.
Yes.
And our faith and our relationship with Christ creates that sanctuary. And when we share it with others, we are ultimately inviting them into this lifestyle. But give me some practical examples of how to create these pockets of Hygge in your life, both in the terms of arranging your house or maybe your life, but also in terms of arranging your relationships with people.
Absolutely. Well, I think in terms of arranging your house, the aesthetics of an atmosphere of Hygge, we have to remember that Hygge is not just what you see on your wall. It's not just the pretty tablescapes or the Instagrammable moments. You're really trying to create an atmosphere. of comfort, of contentment, of hospitality. And an atmosphere is not just what you see. If you think about like when you go to a restaurant and you want to rate it for atmosphere, you're really not just rating it for, the type of decor they have on the wall.
Right.
You're rating it for maybe cleanliness. You're rating it for the hospitality of the server. You're rating it for what kind of the noise level in the restaurant and the smells that waft throughout the room. That's atmosphere. Atmosphere encompasses all 5 senses. And I think that's something the Danes do really well. They are often considered minimalists by certain cultures because they certainly do have less in their home than the average, certainly average Westerner. I would push back on that a little bit and say that they're not necessarily minimalists, they're meaningfullists. They put things in their house that really add value and meaning, not just to the space, but to the relationships that are cultivated there. So they focus on smells and sights and sounds, the aesthetic feelings, touch, all 5 senses. So in the realm of hygge, when you're trying to create a hyggelee atmosphere in your home, you really want to focus on not just the sense of sight, what you see, the pretty things that you can throw on your wall that you purchased at, from Magnolia Table or whatever. It's, all 5 senses. As far as some practical tips for hygge in relationships, I think it really does begin and end with hospitality. And that word gets thrown around a lot in Christian circles because actually hospitality is a biblical command. It goes all the way back to, Leviticus. And we also see it again in the New Testament. I think we as Americans can sometimes define hospitality incorrectly. And that's what holds us up. We're less apt to be hospitable because we have an incorrect view of what hospitality is. We look at hospitality as, the beautiful tablescapes, wonderfully planned menus, activities, your house is perfectly spotless. And we put together this laundry list of things that has to be accomplished before you can invite someone into your house. And that laundry list usually paralyzes us and makes us not send out the invitation. But remember, hospitality is a biblical command. It's not a, open your door if you feel like it. It's open your door. And so I would say, for the most part, we have twisted hospitality and actually slapped the label of entertainment on it. Entertaining is vastly different than being hospitable. Hospitality is more about the other person and less about us, whereas entertainment is really about us. Do I have, the most beautiful house? Is my house clean? Do I look presentable? Am I serving a wonderful, 4-course meal? It's about us, whereas hospitality is about the other person. What can I do to make this person feel welcomed, to make them feel seen, to make them feel known? It's about creating an environment where a person can bring their real self and their real struggles in order that you can then show them the comfort of Christ who can help and soothe those real struggles and those real aches. So in the realm of hospitality, one practical tip that has always helped me be able to feel more at ease opening my door is to have sort of like a go-to menu for each season that I can fall back on within the season, that I always have the ingredients for on hand, that is like a crowd-pleasing, no-fuss meal that I know how to make and can whip up pretty quickly. And if I have the ingredients to all of those, to at least one solid meal on hand at all times, then I know I can easily extend an invitation at the last minute because I have something in my cupboard ready to whip up at any given moment that's easy to make. And my kids will tell you, if you get an invitation to my house, chances are they know exactly what's on the menu. It's going to be chicken Alfredo because that's my go-to meal. It feeds a crowd. I always have the ingredients on hand. And so they just know that's what we're having. But that's my easy yes. I can extend an invitation because I know I'm always ready to.
And see, you're intentional about it. And I think that makes all the difference. So you prepare yourself in advance for the possibility of hospitality. And I think that this is part of the practice to where we anticipate those moments and we're ready for them and they don't take us by surprise. And actually,
Yes.
as I was thinking about our interview, I found a Hygge verse in the Bible. In
Oh,
the
I want
New
to hear it.
Testament. So let's see if you incorporated that in your book. But it's actually in the 3rd John chapter 1. The author praises his friend Gaius, and the very first verse of it says, "Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even and as your soul is getting along well." And in some translations, it says, even as your soul prospers. And later, if you read this chapter, he praises Gaius for his hospitality, that he has shown unusual hospitality to other Christians who came to the area to share the gospel, as opposed to some other church members who actually were very hostile towards them. And so I think this very first verse where he pronounces this blessing over him, where he says, may you prosper in your health, may you prosper in your work, in your business, and as your soul prospers, is that Hygge laws. So as you practice the hospitality towards others, it comes back to you as a blessing upon your life. And so would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I think you actually hit the nail on the head when you use the word intentionality. I think when you are intentional to set up some rhythms and practices and even traditions in your home, and that's all three of those words are very ingrained in the hyggelee lifestyle, rhythms, traditions, and practices. When you are intentional to set those things up beforehand, you can then live out that verse that you just said, not just in your life, but also extend that blessing to others. You had mentioned that the Danish people are swathed in winter and in biting temperatures in a hostile environment most of the year. And that is very true. And yet, even in the times of wintering, they thrive, because they have put into place some intentional rhythms and practices. They know winter is coming. There's no avoiding it. It will come whether they like it or not. And so they actually have this phrase that says there's no bad clothing, or there's no bad weather, only bad clothing, meaning the weather is going to be there or not. Now, you can decide to dress properly and go out into the weather and enjoy creation, or you can stay inside, and be bored. Either way, the weather is going to come. And isn't
it the same with life?
Yes, absolutely. I was just getting to that. Like, there will be seasons of winter in your life that are unavoidable, living on this side of eternity, dark times. And because we all know they are unavoidable. If you're not in a season of struggle right now, a season is probably coming, because that is just the nature of humanity on this side of the garden, on this side of eternity. And so because of that, you can put some practices and rhythms in place, and I share about some of them in my book, to provide an outward feeling of comfort in order that you can feel inwardly comforted by Jesus. It sort of recalibrates your vision. It moves your eyes to Him when you set up certain rhythms and practices. And that really, the Danes wouldn't encourage you to celebrate or embrace Hygge with the point of pointing you to Jesus, but I think that that's something that we as believers can do. Hygge is just a lifestyle practice. It's not going to save anyone, but it can be a tool to remind us of the hope that we have in Jesus.
I love it.
Even in the seasons of winter in our life.
So in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that you outline in your book the principles. Did you say 7, I think?
7 tenets, yep.
7 tenets of Hygge. Let's quickly run through them. Of course, they will have to purchase your book to find out more in detail.
Sure. Let's see if I can rattle them off quickly. It's been a while. Hospitality, relationships, well-being, comfort, contentment, rest. Oh, and I forgot one, atmosphere. Atmosphere would come in the middle. So that's the 7.
And so, let's talk about your book. What are some of the practical things that a reader would find for these tenets or how to implement them in their lives by reading your book?
Well, that's a great question. Under the chapter of relationships, relationships are, I believe, scripturally, as Christians, we should have relationships that are threefold. We should have relationships that are encouraging. Those are the relationships that give us the courage to do the thing that God is calling us to do. Those are our encouragement relationships. Then there's discipleship relationships. These are sort of reaching ahead, reaching behind to people a little bit further on the journey or a little bit behind us on the journey to help point them to Jesus in a more solid way. And then there's the evangelistic relationships. And these are relationships with those who do not know of Christ yet. And so really, if our relationships are centered on anything but those three, it's really a waste of our relational capital. And within the book, I'm a really awkward person. I can sometimes get myself in conversations where I'm like, oh, why did I just say that? Or I can easily, because I am a human person, I can easily make the conversation very self-centered, more about myself. But really, in order to develop the deep, solid relationships that are needed in order that you can have the relational capital with which to speak truth into a person's life. I say in the book, you have to know a person well enough to know them and owe them. So in order to develop those deep relationships, you have to take the spotlight off of yourself and really focus on them and who they are. And so I provide a handful of questions to strike up conversations with new people that you've never met, folks that you have had relationship with for a while and you want to go deeper with, and even some conversation questions and starters for sort of pivoting a regular conversation into more spiritual matters so that you can begin to share the hope of Jesus with them in a natural, organic way so you're not awkward and clunky.
So what about atmosphere?
Yeah, with atmosphere, I do give some practical suggestions. I will say I am not a home interior designer. My husband actually has a great gifting at that, so I lean heavily into him. I think one of the things to remember about atmosphere as it relates to hygge, the Danish people are very, they have a love for nature, green things, bringing the outside in. And part of that has to do with the fact that, their outside is covered in snow for, 80%, 75% of their year. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but it feels like that, especially, I'm in Minnesota and I feel like winter lasts for
10 months out of 12.
Yeah, a good solid 10 months. And so they are very intentional about bringing the outside in. And so plants around their living spaces remind them and sort of recalibrate their vision towards green things, living life. It gives them that like burst of summer in the middle of, winter. So definitely lots of green things growing. They are very simple designs with natural elements, a lot of wood elements, neutral colors, with the idea that clutter, science shows us the more cluttered a space is, the more our hormones increase and the more internally agitated we become. And a chaotic outward space really does lead to a chaotic inward feeling. And so that's one of the reasons why most of their living spaces are so sparse, because empty spaces, we could call them white spaces where there's, big swaths of nothingness, lead to a more peaceful posture internally. So it's not necessarily about just buying the next hot thing at Walmart or the department store that, you've seen on Instagram. It's about, really being intentional to decorate your spaces with meaningful things to you, things that render memory, that conjure up memories of your relationships, of your family, of your home. Recently, I was in the market to buy a new couch because my couch is about 10 years old and it's lost all its shape and all its form. And I got a couch and I brought it home and I took a picture of it and I showed my friends, I sent it to them in a text. And it was a super cute couch, very trendy, very on point with design. And without fail, they all came back and said, "No, Jamie, that's not your couch." And here's what they said as their reason. "Your home is homey. That couch makes your home look like a house." And there really is a difference. I want a home, not a house.
This is a very good point. And I was thinking, as wonderful as the concept of hygge sounds, how easily, if we don't bring our relationship and our centeredness in Christ into this, how easily we could slip into idolizing these things, because
absolutely
we embrace that lifestyle because we're seeking comfort and we're seeking shelter. And if we ultimately look for shelter in things or food, let's think of comfort food. It's wonderful and makes us feel warm and loved and cared for. But if we put all the emphasis on that comfort food, it really makes us gain weight.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Comfort food is not necessarily the best for the health of our body. And the same with cozy spaces in your house. If that's what your peace and comfort depends on, you can become obsessed and spend every penny you have on buying the next thing, that makes you feel cozy and comfortable. But when we have that in proper balance with our relationship with God, I think it could be a very powerful way for surviving the winter of life, so to speak.
Because if you think about it, all 7 tenets really were seen in the garden, and I sort of focused on that in my book. How hospitality and relationships, well-being, atmosphere, comfort, contentment, rest, all of those things were seen in the garden. And when we are not careful to put them at the foot of the cross, things do get off balance. Even in the realm of atmosphere, is there anything wrong with putting something pretty on your wall? No. But you and I both know that there are houses that are costly and creatively decorated, and yet you walk into them and you feel ragged and ill at ease. You don't feel welcomed, maybe because they are so beautifully decorated, you feel like it's very sterile and you can't sit and be at ease. So all 7 tenets, even atmosphere, have to be placed at the foot of Jesus. All of the 7 tenets of hygge are just kind of placebos in and of themselves. They're good for a temporary moment, but they will not give you true and lasting comfort or true and lasting rest. They have to be put at the foot of the cross. And, the ultimate goal would be then to use those tenets to bring you to the foot of the cross in order that you can really embrace, the true and lasting sanctuary that only Jesus can provide.
Absolutely. And that's why I think your book is really important because it really points us to a proper way of combining our physical and spiritual life to create the ultimate sense of well-being in our lives. So where can people find more resources and information about implementing the Holy Hygge in their homes?
Well, you can find the information I provide by going to jamieerickson.com. That's where you will have access to the Holy Hygge podcast that features every single one of the tenets. And I interview guests who have walked out and lived out those particular practices, as well as I also offer some free printable downloads from season to season, some practical ideas and ways that you can implement hygge in your home during each and every season.
So with my last question, hygge, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation, really is connected with winter season, the cold season. But what are some elements of hygge that are present in in now. We're in the middle of summer right now.
Right. Well, the rhythms and practices are the same regardless of the season. You just tweak them each to match the season that you're in. So the idea of, say, a hyggelee hobby, which is something that I mention in the book, a hobby or some fun element that you do only within the season that is now, in order that you can step into that season with excitement and anticipation. So for me, a couple of summertime hyggelee things. I create kind of like a mealtime playlist for myself in the summer meals that I only make in the summer, so that my family can be excited about enjoying them, because they're limited in how often they can experience those particular meals to just the summer. I have particular activities that we only do in the summer, particular hobbies that I only do in the summer. Currently, I've got a big stack of books, kind of summertime beach reads that I have been hoarding for myself leading up to summer, that I hope to get to throughout these warmer months. So the practices of setting yourself up with some summertime rhythms, some seasonal rhythms, really is the same in the summer as it is in the winter or the fall. It's just that it is more applicable and pertinent to that season, because that's really what hygge is all about. It's about being present in this particular moment, not always reaching and looking for a moment that you were in or a moment that is coming, but being fully present right here, right now.
Well, and in the book of Ecclesiastes, we're told that being able to enjoy what we have is a gift from God. And I think
Right.
hygge is really putting this into practice, is finding enjoyment in the present, in what is now, in the season you're in, and creating the atmosphere to enhance that. Basically,
Right.
it's just a tool to help you enjoy the moment and the season you're in. And I think that is very biblical. And I saw an article somewhere where it connects. Not connects, but talks about the health benefits from hygge. And I don't know if there is a scientific, I don't remember the full premise of the article, so I don't know if there is a scientific foundation to it, but I think it just makes sense.
Right. Yes. And to your point, it's also in Ecclesiastes where we learn that there is a season for everything under heaven. I believe it's not by accident that God ordained the seasons both in creation and in our lives. And we can be really quick to want to escape from certain seasons, the seasons of our lives, of our days that are not as enjoyable. Maybe the ones that contain a lot of struggle, maybe a lot of hardship, maybe a lot of tears. But we have to remember, even in seasons of, let's say, winter, or if you live in the southern hemisphere, maybe that for you is summer, where it just seems like summer lasts forever and it's never ending. In those difficult seasons, we have to remember that God is still at work doing amazing things. It is in the season of winter that roots grow really deep. Silent, hidden things are happening under the soil that we might not see on the surface, but there's still wonderful growth happening. And we wouldn't necessarily have springs, summers, or falls without winters, would we? And we can appreciate the growth that happens in those other seasons only because of the work that is done in the winters.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I'm inspired now to reevaluate my life from the perspective of Holy Hygge. And we definitely are going to put a link to your website in our show notes so that our listeners have an easy access to it. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure, Helen. Thank you so much. You were very hospitable.
Thank you. And there you have it, my friend. We have reached the end of another amazing episode, and I hope you're feeling inspired to bring hygge into your life, both physically and spiritually. Remember, it is not just about creating a cozy atmosphere or indulging in simple pleasures. It's about embracing a mindset of intentionality and finding joy in the present moment. I encourage you to check out Jamie's book, Holy Hygge. You will see the link in our show notes. And then take what you have learned today and put it into practice. Embrace simplicity, cultivate gratitude, nurture your relationships. By incorporating these principles, you will be able to create a haven of warmth and peace and spiritual growth in your everyday life. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you experienced Hygge from a Christian perspective? Share your thoughts, stories, and ideas with us. You can check our website, rfwma.org, or you can connect via email, podcast@rfwma.org. And also check our social media accounts. Limitless Spirit has a Facebook page that is quite fun, and an Instagram page. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on the future episodes where we explore some other aspects of living a life with a greater purpose. Thank you so much for joining. Until next time, I'm Helen Todd.
Limitless Spirit Podcast is produced by World Missions Alliance. We believe that changed lives change lives. If you want to see your life transformed by Christ's love, or if you want to help those who are hurting and hopeless and discover your greater purpose in serving Christ through short-term missionary work, check out our website, rfwma.org, and find out how to get involved.